I'm going to talk about polymeters. Not strictly a sound design technique, but interesting nonetheless. I won't get into detail about what a polymeter is because I don't want to get bogged down in theory today, and you can look it up. In particular, I'm going to tell you how to set up polymeters using different tracks. Okay, so how to set one up. Let's talk about finding the loop point for any two or more cyclic rhythms, or you could say where they briefly return to phase. I need to go through this because you can benefit from a bit of predicting power when you're setting up your polymeters on the MPC. Let's say that we have a sound that occurs every 4 beats and a sound that occurs every 3 beats. How many beats are we going to need before those sounds occur together again? Well, many of us can just do that in our head. The answer is, of course, 12 beats. The sound which happens every 4 beats needs to cycle 3 times, and the sound that happens every 3 beats needs to cycle 4 times, and then they'll meet up. We could look at an even more complex one using larger numbers, or even more than 2 rhythms at once. And in that case, we might need to do a quick calculation, and I'll talk about that a bit later. But for the time being, let's just use a simple one as our example. So this is with the 3 beats and the 4 beats. Set the sequence length to the number of bars which correspond to the number of beats required. So for this example, we need 12 beats. So if our preset meter is 4/4, that means 3 bars, or in other words, 4 beats plus 4 beats plus 4 beats. Make sense? 3 bars in total. There's me 3 bars. So yeah, on the MPC it has this legendary feature which is not present in all sequences. It allows you to have different track durations. It'll loop each track at the next extent of its duration. So if I set track 1 instead of sequence, if I set that to 4 beats, and I can set track 2 instead of sequence to 3 beats in length, and that track's going to loop every 3 beats. Because we set our sequence to be 3 bars, in other words, 12 beats, and because 12 is a multiple of both 4 and 3, then both tracks are going to phase back together, having a single loop point every 3 bars. Okay, so let me just set this up. I'll pop some sounds in here and you'll see what I mean. Just scroll back over to the start there, and you can see I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 beats. If I zoom out, that is the extent of the length of that track, and what happens is it loops over and over again. And because we knew that 4 beats will cycle within 12 beats, it fits cleanly inside of the sequence. So I'll just record beat 1 here. Well, that wasn't very clean. I'll do it again. And I'll do track 2. So track 2, alternatively, only cycles every 3 beats. Remember, we set it up that way, but 3 goes into 12, so this is going to occur 4 times. I'll use a different sound. I've just got to zoom back out so you can see that happening. Okay, now that's a 3 against 4 polyrhythm. Doesn't sound very impressive because actually it's occurring at what is, for this particular rhythm, it's quite a slow tempo. So we've got to ramp the tempo up. So I'll just increase that tempo. Let's make it like 500. Now that's going to make it sound like a proper 3 against 4. If I go back to grid, track 2, zoom out, track 1. Okay, so you have to put that tempo right up to perceive it as a polyrhythm, and that's because effectively what happens is what we've been calling beats. We start to hear them as subdivisions. But then again, why do we need such high tempos? Well, the MPC only allows you to go down 2 beats as the finest measure of track length. I'll show you what I mean. You can only go down to 1 beat there. But of course, there are ways around this. I mean, at this point, it's probably worth mentioning that you can program any kind of polyrhythm that you want within a single track. You don't need to use this multi-track method. This one's 7 against 9 against 11, and just put together in the regular old sequencer. So you could do them that way. But while we're using the variable track length as a way of setting up polyrhythms, maybe just a different way of thinking about them, then you need a little trick that will allow you to bring the tempo down if you want to. It goes without saying that having twice as many events in a rhythm cycle, then halving the tempo and also the number of beats in the sequence will bring you back to the initial number of events. So what we're going to have to do is try and create 2 of everything, right? So what I'll do first is reduce this tempo down to something a lot more manageable because I like to play in my sounds. And then I pop into grid edit mode. I'm in track 2 at the moment. Now what I want to do is double the frequency of this event inside of this cycle. In other words, there's going to be 2 of it rather than 1. I'm going to just do this now. I think this is the sound I was using. Where is it? There it is. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, That wasn't perfect, but I think it was good enough. Timing correct came to the rescue. I'll go back to track 1. Difference with track 1 is that we've only got 3 beats in track 1. If we want to put this event again precisely halfway through those 3 beats, I'm going to have to subdivide. So from a quarter to an eighth note, and that's important if you start doing really complicated polyrhythms. Quarter to an eighth note, so I'm going to have to come in on beat 2 and a half, so 2 and. Let's go. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2 and 3, 4. Did I record that? Yes, I did. So I've effectively doubled the frequency of the events in this cycle, as you can see. Now, if I go back to main, I can put that tempo. Let's put it back to 250, which is precisely half the tempo of what we started out with, 500, if you recall. So 250, we should hear something which is exactly like the original polyrhythm. Yeah, and there it is. So what's going on here? I have doubled the frequency of the events, which means that I can halve the tempo, bringing it from 500 back to 250, which is on the way back to being a reasonable tempo. We could also halve the number of beats in the cycle as a consequence of this too. But halving 3 bars is a little tricky because I have to change the time signature in order to do that neatly. So I won't do that now. I'll do that in the next example that I give you. Well, that's a relatively simple meter. What about doing something more complex? Something we may have trouble with working out just in our head. Let's say something like 6 against 8. Now, like the easier example, the first thing we need to know is how many beats will occur before the sounds meet up again. Once we know how many beats, we can work out how many bars. Unlike the example I used before of 3 and 4, it's not just a matter of multiplying those numbers to find out. What we need is a maths term here. It's called the lowest common multiple. You might recall this from school, but if you don't, there's lots of examples on YouTube, and I'll put a link in the notes below. The lowest common multiple of 6 and 8 is 24. Now, in other words, 24 divides into 6 and also into 8. But there is no lower number which can divide into both 6 and 8, so it's the lowest common multiple. So, in other words, we'll need 24 beats altogether before 6 and 8 both cycle back and land at the same time. Now, 24 beats, how many bars that makes? Well, it depends on your time signature. We could use 4/4, but let's go with 3/4 instead, just for fun. If we use 8 bars of 3/4, where there is 3 beats per bar, that gives us 24 beats. So we're going to need 8 bars of 3/4. There's a little bit of a trick to changing time signatures in the live. I'm doing it quickly now, but maybe I will do another little video on that, or you can look it up.
Right, 1, 2, 3 beats. Change that up to 8 bars, and we should have 8 bars of 3/4.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But having done that, I'm actually going to halve the number of bars and use only 4 bars of 3/4. 1, 2, 3, 4 bars of 3/4. This is because I'm going to pull the same trick as last time. I'm going to end up doubling the number of notes in each rhythm, and they'll phase back together twice as fast, and you'll see what I mean in a second. So I'm only going to need 4 bars, and it means that I won't have to pump the tempo too high. So just like the example, I'll set track 1 to our first rhythm. It's 6 beats long, so track 1, and I'm just going to record another beat. And then track 2, like that, 8 beats, and record the snare sound. Oops. The difference is that this time I'm going to anticipate having to double the rhythm because I don't want to set up that stupidly fast tempo, so I can actually just go and copy those notes, copy, and put it on the 5th beat along. Oops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry about the dogs and the cars in the background. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's exactly halfway through. Go to track 1. Same thing. I'll just record it in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So twice as many notes in track 1 and track 2, which means I'll only need those 4 bars to achieve my polyrhythm, just so we can hear it. So if I hit play on that, you're hearing that rhythm. That's the polyrhythm 6 against 8. You might think at this stage, oh, that sounds remarkably like 3 against 4. Well, it does, because 6 against 8, of course, divides down to 3 against 4. But the technique that I've demonstrated using these tracks allows you to do something more complicated than 6 against 8. You could try larger numbers, and you can try using more than 2 tracks. In other words, more than 2 rhythms cycling. What you must keep in mind, though, is that the more rhythms that you have concurrently and the higher those numbers might be, you could drive up your lowest common multiple. In other words, the lowest number of beats that you require for all of those rhythms to cycle back again and begin again together, it could end up being quite high if you're using complex ratios, more than 2 or 3 different rhythms at once, or if the number of beats for each rhythm is more than 7 or 8 or 9, you could end up with a very high LCM. But still, it's a trick worth exploring. I've shown you the technique for dividing it down using the sequencer, which means that you don't have to end up with crazy tempos. You can keep increasing the resolution, if you want to put it that way. Just using these sounds on different tracks, you can explore really complex polyrhythms. And the other thing to keep in mind is that you don't just stop with the polyrhythm, you've got to flesh it out a bit. Use it as a bit of a springboard for exploring different beats. So before I just fleshed out that 6 against 8 polyrhythm made it interesting. So hopefully you can have fun with this. Thanks.